Over to you, Blake.
All right, well, good afternoon, everyone. I am Blake Cush. I am the Director of Training and Outreach at OVS, and welcome to the OVS VAP Training Center webinar, Understanding and Resolving Conflicts. You can go ahead and advance our slides for us. On your screen, you should be able to see how to access in case you see our mouths moving right now and you can't actually hear us. There's a few ways you can join the event for audio, as well as there's computer audio feature as well that WebEx enables. So leave that up for just a second. Next, go ahead to the next slide too. So on your screen, or excuse me, every webinar we do in this series that we've been doing since Jenny Noun started with us, including today's, we've always recorded and we made available a hyperlink on our website on the OVS YouTube training channel. And we want to make sure that you understand that this will be, the same will be done for today as well. We encourage you to visit the VAP training OVS VAP Training Center for more information. There's a calendar of events in there, information about the upcoming related to our conference, information related to Victim Service Academy trainings, as well as all of these TARP related additional webinar series trainings that we offer. There's also a link down there at the bottom of the screen that you can click on that'll take you to some of these small coaching sessions. And in a minute, I'll turn it over to Janie Nan, and they can share a little more information about some of those opportunities that are still have space available. So take advantage of them while you can. We really encourage that. As soon as you exit today's webinar, you'll be directed to an evaluation survey. We'll put a QR code. We'll also put a link in the chat box for you to access this as well. But please give us the feedback on that. This is one of our last webinars we'll be doing in a while. So we really appreciate that feedback. It helps us build and improve and foster a continued learning experience for all of our training. So that is very highly valuable, and we appreciate your time with that. So without further ado, today's webinar is led by Jennifer Amsus of JA Strategies and Alan Krieger of Krieger Solutions on your screen. Jenny and Alan have more than 40 years of combined experience in consulting and training, working with not-for-profits and agencies around the state of New York, and both have served as executive directors of nonprofit organizations. Both also have master's degrees in management. Without further ado, I'd like to formally turn it over to Jenny and Alan and get us started.
Thank you so much, Blake. While we're still on this slide, I'll just talk a little bit briefly about this. Nicole, if you can go back to that previous one real quick. So as Blake said, these are smaller workshops. Unlike our webinars, if you haven't seen us advertise these before, these are smaller workshops. Each one will be offered multiple times. So when you look at time and work management, that's being offered 3 times, so it's the same workshop 3 times. So if you do, we encourage people to sign up. If you do sign up, please let us know if you're not going to come, because the enrollment is limited because it is an interactive workshop. But we've had a great time meeting people from across the state, and it gives you really opportunity to interact with colleagues at other victim service agencies. So instead of just listening to us as we're doing today, you'll have an opportunity to really participate and build your skills in that way. So thank you. And then we can move on. The chat feature today, I know a lot of people have done multiple webinars with us, and you've heard us talk about the chat feature. WebEx switched it a couple months ago, so we used to talk about where you could find it. Now you find it somewhere different. It is now at the bottom of your screen, all the way over to the right. You'll see a small blue bubble and the word chat. If you have questions during the webinar today, or there are multiple times where Alan or I will say, please chat in what you think about this, or please give us an example. That's where we want you to do it. We want you to use the chat feature. Please, if you look at what the slide we have today on, or what the example we have on the slide, you'll see that it says send to everyone. What I'm asking you to do is actually to switch that. So instead of sending it to everyone, we want you to send it to all panelists. That way, we'll be sure to see your question, because sometimes I'm presenting, sometimes Alan is presenting. If you chat to all panelists, then we will all see what's going on. And that's different from chatting to the host. So yeah, if you can change that setting to all panelists before you put in your questions, that would be great. We're also going to do an online poll today. So when that comes up, the online poll will pop up on the right-hand side of your screen, and you'll have an opportunity to answer the questions that way. And I just wanted to remind people that the slides for today have been shared in the chat by Rachel. They're a little bit further up there, but they are and they've been shared again. So if you want to see the slides later, they're in the chat right now. So today's topic is understanding and resolving conflicts. And conflicts are to be expected in the workplace, and they're to be expected in all of our relationships. So they're inevitable. And by the end of our time together today, we want you to be able to understand what are the things that actually escalate a simple disagreement or different ideas into what we would consider a negative or destructive conflict. We all come to the workplace with different ways that we handle conflicts. So we're going to give you some strategies to deal with those different styles. And we're also going to talk about ways to diffuse tense situations so that you can move to a place of trust, so that's easier for you to resolve these conflicts. And finally, we want to help you understand a four-step conflict resolution process that's going to help you move from conflict to problem solving. So let's start. When we hear the word conflict, generally, we immediately think of something that's negative and maybe something that you want to avoid. But we're all different. We all have different ideas and different ways of approaching issues. And so as a result, conflict is a normal part of life. In any relationship, even with people we think we see totally eye to eye with, we will encounter conflict every so often. But it doesn't need to be something that we consider negative. Instead, we should see it as an opportunity to broaden the way we think and a way that we can understand other people better. Conflict itself is not a negative thing. It's normal and it's healthy. It's only when we handle conflict or the disagreements that cause conflict, when we handle those things poorly, that's when a conflict becomes something that's negative or destructive. So before we move on, I want to start us off with a quick poll. I want you to think about conflicts in your workplace. How often are those conflicts resolved productively? Are they something that always happens? Are they always resolved in a good, what you would think is a productive and a good way, all the way to are they almost always resolved not productively? So we're going to give you about 30 seconds to answer the question. So think about it a second. So are they resolved productively almost all the time, mostly, sometimes, or nearly never? So we're going to open the poll right now.
Sorry, people are chatting and it's hiding the button.
So thank you very much for the people who are responding. I'm glad you're on the call. We're actually going to give you an opportunity to click a button.
Sorry, bear with me for just a moment. Okay, there we go.
There we go.
So be sure to make your choice and hit submit.
Right, you have about 12 seconds left. All right, and now we're going to give WebEx a second to produce it. It takes the program a minute to give us the results. Okay, so for the people who responded, thank you very much. About the majority of you, or not the majority, but about a third of you thought that you're somewhere in the middle. Some are resolved productively, some not so productively. A fair number of you, probably 52 out of the 150, 160 that we have on today, think that most or nearly all of them are resolved productively. So that's really wonderful. And very few of you think that most are not resolved productively. So by the end of today, we hope that at minimum, you'll be able to move at least the conflicts that you're involved in from wherever it is, somewhere in the middle, up to most or nearly all being resolved productively. we're going to provide you with those strategies. So thank you for participating. So we're thinking about conflict. Before we start on any journey, we need to know what our destination is. So what are we hoping to achieve when we engage in a conflict resolution process? As humans, we naturally want conflict to go away, and we're probably hoping that the result of that conflict will go our way. We did, two of us, we disagree on two things. We want things to go our own way. But the goal of a conflict resolution process can't be to win the argument, to win the conflict. The goal needs to be to find a solution that works for both parties involved, or all of the parties that are involved in the conflict. And that means you're probably going to have to give a little bit during the conflict resolution process when you're finding that solution. So you're going to have to move beyond that face-to-face confrontation to more of a side-by-side problem solving. And how do we do that? We move beyond our own position of defense. If somebody is angry or forceful, then we don't want to fight back in an aggressive way. Instead, we want to diffuse the situation and then help the other person regain their own equilibrium. And only at that point will you be able to begin that side-by-side problem solving. So as I said in the beginning, disagreements can be healthy and they can be productive. Those are our positive conflicts. But what are some, so I wanted to give you an opportunity to chat in. What are some examples that you can think of what are positive conflicts? Close out my polling so I can see the answers. Anybody have any? I know it takes a minute for them to show up. Remember to make sure your chat. So organizational strategies, that's a great example. Finding your different ideas on the strategies for an organization. A face-to-face meeting to better understand perspectives regarding back and forth emails with confusion, right? So people have different ideas, they don't know what's going on, a face-to-face meeting on those. A difference of opinion on how to complete two tasks. So in those types of positive conflicts, you're working together to find a solution, and you're handling those well. So when somebody suggests a helpful change you never thought of before, and promptly says, "Why aren't you doing X?" When the answer is, "Because I never thought of that." That's an awesome idea. So some positive conflicts again are opportunities to grow, to learn new things, and to get new ideas. But those are great examples. But as we've already covered, sometimes conflicts or disagreements are handled poorly and they become negative. And those negative conflicts can impact you and the organization. So I want you to think about those negative conflicts and some of the impacts of those. What do you think the cost of negative conflict is? And again, you set your chat to all panelists and chat in some answers. So if things have gone poorly and you have a negative conflict in your workplace, what is the impact of that? Loss of trust, inefficiency, loss of staff and low morale, poor work performance, poor communication, less likely to work with that person again, distrust, uncooperative. When you feel like you have an uncooperative colleague, there's not a lot of trust there. It creates high stress, which can lead to burnout syndrome, poor communication, destruction of the relationship, employee morale. So those are all really great examples. And so it makes, and thank you, I know they're still coming in. It makes it really obvious why it's important to really start to think about how can you resolve those, how can you, one, avoid the negative conflicts in your workplace, and how you can, and what you're going to do to move them into a positive situation and a productive solution. So we know what the cost of conflict is when the conflict is negative or destructive. So it's time for another poll. And this poll is, we know that conflict can be bad when it's negative. I want you to think about how you personally approach conflict. So some of us know it's healthy and productive, and we also are comfortable with it. So we dive right in. So it's not something that stresses us out. Others of us may not like it, but are still comfortable addressing it directly. But then you might be somebody who engage in conflicts only when absolutely necessary because it does totally stress you out. And then some of us are totally conflict avoiding. So I want you to choose one of those 4 things and let us know, how do you approach conflict? Again, you have about 27 seconds left to answer. It should have popped up on the right.
And make sure you hit the submit button at the bottom.
You got 2 seconds left. And one of our comments was for them, it really depends on who the conflict is with. So it may be hard to answer that question because it may depend on who the conflict is with. You may engage with people that you have a high trust with. You may march right into conflict and be comfortable with that. If it's somebody else, you may not be as comfortable with it. So looking for our responses, we're pretty much in the middle. We have almost 50 people who don't like conflict, but they're comfortable addressing it. We have almost 50 people who engage in conflicts only when necessary. And then we have a smaller number both at the top who see it as healthy and productive and are really comfortable addressing it. And then we have about 20 people who try to avoid it at all possible. So we do want to try and move everybody kind of up again, move you up the scale. So if you're, so you get to a place where you become comfortable addressing it directly, even if it's not something that you don't like, you get to a place where you're comfortable addressing it directly. So now you're going to have an opportunity to listen to a conflict conversation that does not go especially well. And it is going to be expertly played today by Blake and Rachel have agreed to be Ann and Pat, who are 2 people who are having a conversation, work conversation. I want you to listen for what you think might be triggering the negative feelings that cause the disagreement, because this is agreement that does not go well. It's an agreement that goes poorly. And I want you to think about the negative feelings that each of the characters might be feeling during the conversation and afterwards. The conversation is between 2 colleagues, Ann and Pat. The scene starts when Ann walks up to Pat's desk and starts talking.
Hey, Pat, I want to talk about the project. We have the first 3 phases done, but I'm going to need some info on phase 4.
No problem. I can have it to you by the end of the day.
That's great. But the last time you just gave me an outline, and that doesn't tell me the whole story. And there's no particular time frame for this. We still have until next week to get it done. So take your time to get me something a bit more robust.
Wait, so you want more than just bullets? I mean, our staff are smart enough to figure it out. With the bulleted outline, everything is right here. It's easy to see. I don't think people want to read through all sorts of detail. And besides, this project may not be rushed, but I am. I have other projects and other people breathing down my neck, as you can see.
Hey, I'm sorry if you think I'm asking too much, but I'm really surprised that you think that all people need are just bare facts. You can't just throw phrases and numbers at them and expect them to figure it out for themselves, which is what you're doing when you give them an outline.
No can do. You're asking me to go way out of my way.
All right, thank you both. So I want you to think about what happened. What do you think triggered Ann in this conversation? You can type your answers into the chat. So first, what do you think triggered Ann? What was her motivation here? So his response indicated resistance. She felt disrespected. She was triggered by Pat's negative attitude. Definitely the lack of cooperation from, it says Blake, but I'm sure they meant Pat. An uncooperative colleague. Pat's tone may have triggered Ann. Pat's lack of attention to detail, his not sharing some of the values. So that's great. Those are all great things. And what do you think triggered Pat or Blake? Pat felt unappreciated. He felt like he was triggered by the idea of he was going to have to do extra work. He was overstressed. He was feeling overwhelmed. the extra workload that was put on him. She indicated dissatisfaction with what he did, felt like his work was not good enough, feeling pressured when his reporting, he had other responsibilities. So it was really the extra work. And you're right. Anne was clearly someone, she wanted more detail, and she wanted Pat to take his time. And Pat had more of a direct and concise approach to getting things done. And so he believed what he was doing was enough, and he felt stressed by that. So when people are in conflict situations like that, the situation tends to create negative feelings for both people who are involved in the conflict, or all people if it's a conflict with more than two people. So the feelings like you see along the bottom. So powerless, disrespected, unappreciated, fearful, overstressed, unfairness. So, and some of you shared some of those. So you shared that Anne felt unappreciated. She felt unfairness, and Pat was feeling, and she felt disrespected by his tone. You feel that Pat was definitely feeling overstressed, and he felt probably disrespected, right? The way you indicated. So those are all feelings that were triggered by this conversation. But if you step back and think about it a minute, Anne and Pat were both trying to do a good job. Neither one of them was trying to be necessarily difficult. Anne, a good job, she thought a good job was more detail, right? She wanted more detail. She wanted that report to be thorough. She wanted to be able to provide everybody with the information they needed to respond to any questions that they had. But Pat had a different perspective. For him, a good job looked different. A good job was one that provided whoever was reading the report or reading the product with concise bullets that got them straight to the point. So it was efficient, got the job done quickly. So the key for them to resolve this situation is to move past that face-to-face confrontation to that side-by-side resolution. In other words, moving beyond those negative feelings that were triggered by the way they had that conversation to finding the common ground. And for Pat and Anne, the common ground was that quality product. So on this next slide, there are these 7 negative feelings behind conflict that we just discussed. And with effective communication, you can reverse all 7 with just one key action. And what do you think that key action might be? Any ideas? I will, so the key action is active listening. When you actively listen to someone, the other person feels appreciated. They feel empowered because they have, if we can move on to the next slide, they feel empowered because they have the floor and they're doing the tasks, talking. They feel like it's more likely that they're going to be treated fairly since their issues are being heard. They feel that they're safer because someone's listening to them, and they feel a little less stressed because as they vent or get rid of their concerns, and they feel respected because someone is taking the time to listen to them. So again, the listening helps move us from all these negative feelings on the left hand of the slide to these positive feelings on the right hand of the slide. So right now, Ellen is going to take us a little deeper into moving from confrontation to that side-by-side problem solving by finding that common ground. Ellen.
Sorry about that. Thanks, Jenny. I was trying to be quiet in the background, forgot I muted myself. So I want to introduce 3 important concepts in conflict resolution. The idea of positions, interests, and common ground. So the first one is position, and your position is a statement of how you think things should be, what you want to see happen. It's your statement of how the conflict should be resolved. Your interest is the motivation behind your position, why you're taking the position you are, what you hope the result will be when the conflict is resolved. And then the common ground is sometimes whatever small bit you can both agree on but something that both parties can find agreement around. And often you can support all or part of the other person's interest, even though you don't support their position. So it's important to start from common ground, and that's what we want to try to find a way to do that. And looking at interest is really the key. So if we go back to the Ann and Pat scenario, Ann's position was she wanted the document to be detailed and complete. She wanted Pat to take his time so it was done well and done right. Pat's position was that he wanted to just do the outline with the bullets. It was quick and easy for him to get it done. He had a lot on his plate and he wanted to finish it quickly. And so what about their interests? Jenny mentioned that on Ann's side, she wanted to produce a product that people could use, that could get all the information they needed. So her interests were a thorough report that worked for the reader. And therefore, she had to take your time and you had to get all the information. Pat's interests were, he had a couple of interests there. One was he was in a hurry, he was jammed up, and he could do bullets real quickly. And that's what most people hear when they hear Pat's interest, and that's what Ann was certainly hearing. But he also said that we have smart staff, and they don't need all that nonsense, and they can just get right to the point with bullets. And bullets is a more effective product than detail. And so the two of them could have gone back and forth forever and never reached agreement. But if you look carefully, their interests are actually the same. And that's the common ground we want to try to get to, is they both wanted to do a quality product. They wanted something that the reader could use. In Pat's case, they could scan and find what they needed. In Ann's case, they could read and get all the information they wanted. But they didn't hear the common ground. All they heard was the positions. The positions were diametrically opposed. They were opposite, yet the interests were actually in line. So it's helpful if you can step back in a conflict situation. It's hard to do, and listen to the other person's interest, because it's usually a legitimate interest, even though that their solution is one you can't support. You don't like the way they want to do it, but there's some aspect, at least some aspect of their interest that almost always you can agree with. And that becomes your common ground. And that's where you can start and you can try to build from there. So let's see how it could work for Ann and Pat. Starting from where they agreed that they want to find a document that works for people, they could have organized it so it had all the details and still had a bulleted outline. Could have been like the bullets could have been an executive summary. They could have been an index or a table of contents, or Ann's details could have been put in the back as an appendix, and Pat's bullets could have been the main part. And now with electronics, it could be hyperlinked to the detailed section. Right, so there are lots of ways to organize it so it could be both skimmable and thorough. But because Ann and Pat were so wedded to their position, they weren't really listening to each other and the conflict wasn't resolved. So there are several ways to respond to conflict. We could try to avoid the conflict, as a number of you said you prefer, withdraw, pretend it's not there. And that becomes the other person wins and we lose. And that's not really a great solution. We can also try moving over to be more aggressive, as Pat was, and try to win or intimidate or talk over the other person so they give up and walk away. So while we win and they lose, it's still not a great outcome, because a number of you talked about the relationship gets pretty badly damaged with that. So even if Pat were to win and carry the day with his strong statement, Ann would have resented it. She wouldn't have been as cooperative, and going forward would have been a more difficult situation. So the strategy we want is called assertive negotiation. It's based on mutual respect, clear understanding by both parties of the other person's positions and interests, and then a negotiated solution where we try to come together to find something that would work for both of us. And that's a win-win, and that's what we really want to try. So we have a 4-step conflict resolution process that'll walk you through this. It's for when someone comes to you angry, upset, or aggressive, or maybe you start a conversation as Ann just did, I need some information, and Pat blows up. Either one of them could have stepped in at that point. They were both pretty agitated. Either one could have stepped in and used this technique to help diffuse the situation and bring it to a good solution. So it starts with listening to diffuse any tension that's there. You can't talk when people are really upset. And then you need to fully understand the other person. You need to take time to make sure you understand what they're trying to say, what they're trying to achieve. And only when you fully understand them can you go on to explain your point of view, which is the 3rd step. and try to find some way to negotiate a mutual solution, the fourth step. So we have some details about each of these 4 steps. First step is to diffuse. Simply listening quietly, often, and let the other person speak can diffuse the tension, or at least diffuses their tension. You may begin to feel stressed out. We'll talk about that at the end a little bit, what to do with that tension in you. But you want to be fully attentive while you're listening. It's important not to do anything else at the same time. You want to give the person your full attention so they feel respected, appreciated, empowered. Those 7 negative feelings we mentioned, again, by listening, we turn them around. And then they don't need to be aggressive or attacking. They're getting their point across. You're showing that you're listening and they can calm down a little bit. It's hard for you often to stay calm when someone is criticizing you or attacking you. So it's important to learn some stress management techniques. And we did have a course recently on stress management. I know OVS has offered some. So you could take a few deep breaths, let go of your need to be defensive, and just listen to what the person has to say. You're not endorsing what they're saying. You're going to have your point of view shared later. But for now, you're just listening. And you want to demonstrate to the person you're listening. Some ways to demonstrate that are through body language. We're just listening quietly. But if we're sitting down, maintaining eye contact, keeping a relaxed or neutral posture, and trying to have our facial expressions as relaxed and neutral as we can. So again, if we're feeling a little attacked and stressed, Ann and Pat both kind of showed that they weren't in a relaxed situation. But the more we can, take that deep breath, come back to our center and just listen and realize the person has concerns and issues, and I want to hear what they are. I'm not going to take it personally, at least at this point. I'm just going to be listening. So it's not easy to do it, but if you do, the tension can be diffused usually fairly quickly, and you can move on to the next step. The second step is that we want to seek to understand the other person before we worry about understanding them. Stephen Covey wrote a famous book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and that was one of his habits. Seek to understand before being understood. And there are 3 reasons for this. The first is if they're upset, they're not going to listen to us anyway, so there's no point in talking. The second is that by understanding them first, we're modeling good listening behavior. They're also feeling more fairly treated, and they're more likely to listen to us when it's our turn to talk. And the third reason is that we might learn something new. It's important to listen carefully because they may have some information we don't have, or we can at least hear their interest behind their position. They broadcast the position, there's no missing that. But the interests sometimes aren't that obvious. We want to listen carefully to see if we can get that. And we want to actively listen so that we can fully understand. And a number of you mentioned that in the chat, that active listening was a key way for turning those 7 bad feelings around. So here are some tips for active listening. Want to listen for how they see things. What are their perceptions? What's their view? What's their take? Whether they're right or wrong, we have to hear how they see it before we can do anything about it. And we also want to see how they'd like things to be. What are their expectations? What's their goal? Jenny said we have to know where we're going before we start on our path if we want to be successful. Where are they trying to get to? So again, their position is how they're going to get there, but where's the end point, the interest? And there may be another way to get there that works. So we want to sort through whether what they're saying is factual and part of their key concern, or if they're just venting and this isn't really the core issue and we can just kind of not worry about some of these details. It's just part of their getting rid of their tension. It's important to sort that out. And we don't want to push through this step. We want to give them the time they need to fully explain where they're coming from. We want to listen for their, again, positions, which are obvious, but more importantly for their interests. And we want to try to support and agree with any part of their interest that we can, and that almost always is a reasonable part in the interest. Again, with Pat, his interest was getting it done quickly. We can support that. He's under stress. It would be nice to make it easy. And certainly his interest was a quality product, and we can support that as well. But rather than just quiet listening here, we want to be active. We're asking open-ended questions to help them clarify their position and ask some questions to try to get down to what their interest is. We want to know why they feel the way they do or think the way they do, and that'll point us to the interest. But the challenge here is not to use the word why, because why sounds accusatory and judgmental. So you may have to say something along the lines of, can you tell me more about that? Or how did you come to that understanding? Or what about this situation is advantageous the way you see it? So these are all ways that say, why do you want to do that? without using the word why. So notice in your day-to-day conversation how often you use the word why. And anytime it's in a tense situation, or you may see the person tense up when you ask why. It tends to be a, an accusatory feeling question. Another critical step is to paraphrase. That means we want to repeat back on our own words what the other person said. So this is the only way to really make sure that we heard them correctly. It gives them a chance to confirm that or to correct us. And it's the only way to prove that we've been listening. If we can repeat back what they said, then obviously we were listening. Nodding our head doesn't mean we heard anything. So paraphrasing is really essential. You want to do it throughout the conversation, not just at the end, but if they're on a real roll, you don't want to interrupt them. But when they pause for a breath, you want to kind of summarize what you've heard and check out whether you got it correctly. So in Ann and Pat again, Ann could have said, I think I heard you say that you really feel that a short bulleted outline will get the job done and no additional information is helpful. Is that right? And Pat could have come back with, I didn't say no additional information. I said very little additional information. So it's a different kind of statement than what Ann heard, and it gives a little wiggle room for some kind of compromise. So, and as with step one, it's important that we're really listening to the other person and not mentally arguing, trying to prepare what we're going to say. We want to keep our focus on what they're saying, which is also hard when we have something we want to blurt out in response. And so we're going to talk about how you share your response on step three, but for step two, it's really all about the other person. It's really about listening and hearing what they have to say. So we're not defending ourselves, we're not sharing our point of view, and it may feel like we're giving in, that they're winning, because we're not saying anything, but the next step is where we get to share our point of view. So step three is the explain step. And now you explain how you see it, what your perceptions are and what your interests are. Leave your positions behind at this point, but talk about what you're trying to accomplish, what you see as the goal, what you'd like, how you'd like things to be. And you want to begin by, if you haven't already highlighted, where you agree. So you might say, you said this, this, and this, and I agree with you. Those are all good points. We have different ways of going about it, but I agree with you. So Ann could have said, I agree that a bulleted outline that people can scan is a good thing. It does. It makes it easy for them to find out what they need. And in addition, I also think that for some people and for some concepts, it's important to have more information. And somebody put in the chat that Ann used the word but, and that was a great point. And it negates, whatever positive she said, yeah, that may work, but it doesn't. And so here I just used the word and in addition, and I added Ann's point that we need a little more detail. So try to frame where you disagree as an addition rather than a replacement or a counterpoint. You don't want to negate their point of view. If there's some part you can agree with, you want to flag that and then add your piece in to make it, in your opinion, more effective, more successful. It's okay to say you don't fully agree with them, that there are points of difference, but you want to keep whatever you say pretty short. If they were pretty hot and you had to really calm them down, steps 1 and 2, you want to stay short and focused because they're going to interrupt you very quickly. They're going to tell you how much they disagree with you, why they disagree with you. You're not taking all the facts into consideration, whatever. They're going to interrupt you. And when they do, the first time, it's important to just stop speaking and switch to listening. Someone said it felt like a power struggle, and it was between the two of them. No value in that. So you're not giving up, you're not surrendering, but you're just stopping and saying, okay, you got more to say? Go ahead, tell me more. And again, you actively listen, you paraphrase, you summarize, you ask questions. Hopefully this time it's shorter. They've already said it once. This is a replay. And then when they kind of wind down and say, okay, so you hear me, they think maybe that they won because you're not fighting back. Before you start talking, you may want to lay out a ground rule. This is a little bit awkward, but if you don't do it, remember we talked about assertive negotiation. You've got to be assertive here. And so something like, thank you for clarifying your position. I think I fully understand where you're coming from. I'd like to share my point of view without being interrupted. I'm happy to hear your comments when I'm finished, but I'd really appreciate it if I could just talk all the way through without any interruption. I think I did a good job listening to you. I asked you questions. I let you say all you wanted to say, and I'm asking for the same in return. So feel free to ask me questions. You can interrupt me with some questions. And if you could summarize kind of what you're hearing, making sure that I'm speaking clearly, I want to make sure that I'm coming across well, that would be helpful. but please don't share your point of view until I'm finished. And then I'll happy to switch and let you rebut or whatever else you want to say. Would that be okay? So it's a kind of a long way to say no interruptions while I'm talking, right? Try to make it nice and collaborative, but that's the bottom line. I need to get my point across. You had your turn, it's my turn. And now the second time when you start talking, even though you did that brilliant job with your ground rule, they're going to interrupt you again, right? Especially where you highlight where you disagree, which is something you need to do. There are parts I agree and parts I don't agree. This time when they interrupt you, I would like hold up my hand and say, wait a minute, we had an agreement. You said you weren't going to interrupt me. And this time I wouldn't let them get away with it. And, you know, and they might say, oh, I'm sorry. And say, yeah, I know you feel strongly and passionately about your point. I get it. I feel strongly and passionately about mine. I'd like to hear mine. So if you don't agree with me, let me finish and then you can share your point again. So we want to be pretty assertive here and not give in. We've made an agreement on a process. We want to hold them to that process. It's a very fair and reasonable process. So don't talk over them. Don't, you know, get into a power struggle, but just stop, ask them to be respectful. And if they agree, you know, go on. If they don't agree, you know, then there's no point in continuing the conversation. You're not going to get to common ground. You're not going to get any kind of resolution. But try not to go into a lot of detail at this point. If they're interrupting you, they're impatient and they're not going to listen to a lot of details. So try to get your main points on there if you can. So finally, we get to step 4, which is negotiation. And it's the final step in the process. Hopefully it's the one where we come up with a solution to our problem. I want you to think of it, Jenny mentioned earlier, side-by-side negotiation rather than opposed parties. You may well be sitting across the desk or a table. You may be standing toe to toe. But in your mind, think of it, you're sitting on the same side of the table. You're working together to come up with a solution. And if it's not awkward and possible to actually sit down on the same side and look at something, if there's something to look at, you can both be looking at the same document. It sends a message that we're in this together. We're going to try to work it out. So you both have shared some strategies and solutions. So you might want to now summarize what they said and what you said. And if you have seen some path that brings those two together, to share that. Is there a way to blend it, or are there parts of each that we could take and build together? You might want to ask them that question if you think they're in a problem-solving mood at this point. You know, we both laid out these 2 different things. Do you see anything in common? But if you don't think they're going to see it, then you may want to share it. So come up with some viable, possible combination. And if you both agree to it, that's your solution. It may be that we have to take one from column A and one from column B, one of their ideas and one of my ideas. I don't love their ideas. They don't love my ideas, but we can each live with this particular one. There's something that they didn't object to too much in my idea. I'll take that one. And there's something that I don't object to too much in their idea, and I'll choose that one. And if we put these 2 together, we each feel like we got a piece of it. It's a win-win. We've each won a little bit. And if you have done the first 2 steps well of listening, you've built some trust, you've built the relationship, or you've salvaged the relationship. They're in a more likely to be in a cooperative mood. And then if you have shared your point of view from your interests rather than your positions, again, they're more likely to support and collaborate with you. So hopefully now we have a solution. And if it's complicated, it's going to take a long time, if there are a lot of steps, you may want to sketch out a short action plan. Basically, who will do what by when, and where you think you might need to check in with each other and see how it's going along the way. If it's a pretty simple, straightforward solution, then no need for an action plan. But if you do set up a plan, make sure you check back early and often, and even schedule that. Let's get together in a week and see how it's going, or depending on how fast the plan takes over. Right, there's a question here in the chat. Someone said the slides aren't clear, so my apologies. They're clear to us, so it may be a connection problem. But someone asked, what if they still don't let you share your perspective, even after you listen and show you understand their positions and interests? So I'm not sure if you asked that before.
They asked during the explain, the between understand and explain.
Okay. All right. So in the explain part, hopefully I gave you the solution to that, is that you lay out the ground rule, you stop, you lay out a ground rule, and you try to really assert that ground rule. And if they continue to talk over you and shout, then it depends on the context. Does it have to be solved? Can you walk away and let them walk away and you each go your own way? Can you appeal to a higher power, higher authority? Someone who has power over both of you, or do you have power that you can assert and just say, if it's a client asking you to do something that you aren't allowed to do, it's not appropriate, just to say, no, not going to do that. If you want to try to work something out, we can, but no, not going to do that. All right, so that it may end up with a win-lose, where you win, they lose, or they have the power, they win and you lose. So there's not 100%. I don't think conflicts are always negotiable and resolvable, but I think most of the time they are. And I think we generally skip the first two steps. And that's really the key. That if we build that relationship, we put some money in the bank, they feel good about us because we're really listening and they feel respected, appreciated, empowered, they're much more likely to work with us. If we come right in with, nope, this is how we do it, like Pat shot right back, really blunt, really direct, that was not going to lead to any kind of a positive resolution. So, okay, yeah, feel free to chat in other questions as you have them or comments. And
we'll have time now, but we also have time at the end to answer some questions.
Yeah. Okay, so so those are the 4 steps, and that's where someone really is coming at you and you have to diffuse and talk it through. Jenny's now going to talk about what if you have to go to them and raise some concerns, and how do you do that without it becoming a negative conflict?
All right, thanks, Alan. So often, sometimes people will come to you with a conflict, but sometimes it's the other way around. You're going to find yourself a little bit more in Anne's shoes. You want to go talk to somebody to bring up a conflict, something they've done, or something that you want to talk about, something that's happened. And in order to do that effectively without it escalating into a negative conflict, you want to be able to give effective feedback. And so feedback is really information that we give to people about their behavior or their actions, and the impact that behavior or those actions have on you, on your organization, on the clients that you serve. Our goal when we're giving feedback is to alert people so that they have an opportunity and you have an opportunity to find a resolution and to maintain or build a strong relationship. So hopefully when you're going and giving feedback, you're not giving feedback in a way that leads the other person to go through Alan's 4-step process. We want to start the feedback so that it doesn't escalate into that and somebody doesn't need to diffuse the situation. In order to do that, we want to, before you give that feedback, before you approach somebody to talk about the conflict that's going on, you want to do some planning. You want to plan about what you're going to say, how you're going to say it, and think about a little bit about what the other person's response might be and how you're going to respond to that. And that will help you really be truly prepared for the conversation that you're going to have. I also want to take you through a couple other guidelines that you see here about giving feedback that will help make it the conversation more effective for everybody involved. First, you really want to find a time and a place that's going to be the most effective for both of you, for you and for the person you're giving the feedback to. And then if you're both working in the office, and when we used to talk about feedback, we would always say you want to plan for somewhere private, like a conference room or a private office, where you can talk uninterrupted. And that is still going to be your ideal situation. But what the last year has taught us is we can't always have that ideal situation. One or both of you might be working remotely, and then and then if that's true, then it's likely that you're not going to be able to have that conversation in person. But it still can happen face to face. And in a case where you can't be in the same room, ideally you're going to have a face-to-face Zoom meeting or team meeting or whatever it is, so you can look at each other. That's going to be better than a phone call. but whatever the place turns out to be, you want to find a time when both of you can talk without distractions and when you can focus on the conversation itself. So that means if we're not in an office where we've closed the door, it's going to be a time where you're not going to be interrupted by a crisis call, and the person you're talking to is not necessarily going to be interrupted by other people in their home. You want to be able to have that conversation privately and without being distracted by what's going on around you. Once you have your plan, there are a few more things that you want to keep in mind. First, remember, this is the initial step in the conflict resolution process. It's just the feedback. So you are taking the opportunity to let the person know the behavior that you noticed and the impact of that behavior. You're ultimately going to move on to problem solving, but you don't want to do it now. You're also not going to use this as an opportunity to give advice to people about how they should be doing something. This is really just the feedback, pure and simple. What happened and what is the impact of that? Whenever we receive feedback that we consider negative, our gut reaction is to react defensively. We want to resist what we're hearing. And so now, and Alan talked about that earlier when, during that diffuse situation, you're being attacked. It's going to be hard to stay calm when you feel like you're being attacked. And so you want to think about that now that the shoe is on the other foot. You're giving the feedback. You want to minimize the other person's defensiveness and resistance. And there are a few strategies that you can use that will help with that, help minimize that defensiveness. The first thing is to really focus your feedback on the other person's behavior or their actions. Giving feedback should not be a personal attack. You should stay away from words that focus on somebody's personality or who they are. We're simply talking about behaviors. In a minute, I'm going to give you an example of what that sounds like. Once you've given that feedback, you want to switch quickly to the active listening, to active listening. That means first you're going to listen quietly to hear what they have to say, and you're not going to interrupt. And then you're going to do some paraphrasing back what you've heard about their thoughts and what you've heard about their feelings. And again, you want to do your best to stay calm and not take what the other person says back to you defensively. So again, you're using the same strategies that Alan talked to you about just a few minutes ago. The key to giving effective feedback is to be specific and to focus on the behavior and the impact of that behavior. So we use a feedback model that is exactly that. It's called the Situation Behavior Impact Model, or SBI model. You can search it up. A lot of people use it, but it's a really effective way to give feedback. And I use it when I'm planning ahead to create my feedback statement to make sure that I'm including all of those in the statement. You start with the S, which is the situation itself, but S can also stand for specific, because you want to be really specific about the situation when the incident or the behavior occurred. If I say you're always interrupting me in meetings, that's a pretty broad statement. You're always doing this. The other person may automatically disagree, or they may really struggle to remember ever interrupting me. So just because it's a behavior that bothers me, the interrupting, it may not be something that the other person's really ever noticed about themselves. So instead, you want to be more specific about a situation when it occurred. So if my feedback was yesterday when you and I were meeting with Bob, you interrupted me while I was presenting my idea for a fundraiser. This will give the other person a really specific, clear picture of what I'm talking about. It's a specific situation that you can bring to mind. They hopefully will remember the conversation itself. So that's here. So yesterday, when you and I were meeting with Bob, you interrupted me when I was presenting my idea for a fundraiser. That's the sentence. And that included the situation yesterday when you and I were meeting with Bob, but it also included the second part of a situation behavior impact statement, and that's the behavior itself. So the situation was the meeting with Bob, but the behavior itself was the interrupting. So you want to include the situation and the specific behavior or issue that happened. And so you interrupted me was a behavior. It was nothing about them itself. It's the action that occurred. Now there's a third part to an effective feedback statement, and that is the I of SBI, or the impact. And what was the impact of somebody interrupting me when I was presenting my idea? how did it impact me, or how did it impact the organization or the team? So the same sentence that I just gave you with an impact statement would be, yesterday, when you and I were meeting with Bob, you interrupted me when I was presenting my idea for a fundraiser, and that made me feel like you don't value my contributions to the team. Situation was meeting with Bob, behavior was interrupting, the impact was that I didn't feel my contributions were valuable. So on our next slide here, we have another example. The report you submitted on Project X was late and had several major errors, and Joe and I had to stay late to clean it up, which inconvenienced us both. So the situation was the report, the behavior was it was late, and the impact was it inconvenienced others, in this case, me and Joe. Once you've delivered your message, you want to remember that this is an opportunity for you to pause and actively listen. Nicole, if you could click one more time. You want to use all your active listening strategies that Alan has already talked about. So the other person has an opportunity to respond to what you've just said. So if you think about it, we're really just, at this point, reversing the process that Alan took us through. And so when you're doing your active listening, again, you want to use all those same strategies for body language. So now I'd like you to take about 30 seconds and think about either a current situation that you have with a colleague, or maybe something that's happened in the past. I want you to jot down a specific feedback statement that you could use that follows the same situation, behavior, impact model. I'm going to give you about 30 seconds or so. And then if you feel comfortable and would like to share it in the chat, it would give us an opportunity to share some examples with the group. Remember, if you share it with all panelists, only we can see your names, so we can announce your feedback statements anonymously. And while people are hopefully writing their feedback statements and entering them in the chat, I will answer one question that came up. And that is, how do you make this work when it is supervisor and a supervisee? This is the model we use when we're talking about giving feedback to supervisees. It's the same model, that situation, behavior, impact. There can be some nuances, but to the same degree that you want to present specifics about if there are behaviors or actions that are not meeting your performance expectations, you want to be specific about those. You want to be specific about the situation, the situations where it's happening. So yesterday, when you were meeting with a client, you raised your voice, and that client no longer felt safe in our space. So it's the same situation, behavior, impact statement that you can use with your with the people who report to you. We've talked about that, and it may be on. Do we have that in a former webinar, Alan? Is that one that's recorded? Giving feedback to staff. I'm not sure that we do.
Yeah, I think we did a leadership one on accountability or performance management,
right.
Something like that.
So it would have the same kind of model in there. Yes, go ahead, Alan.
Some people trying to chat in, but just with the supervisor, supervisee, the question I followed up a little bit is also, as the supervisee to the supervisor who's kind of pulling a power play, how do you respond? And we'll talk about that at the end of the session here today. But
yes. So here's one: when I'm not informed about changes to policy, I don't feel like a valued member of the team. So that's the behavior and the impact. So that's great. You just maybe want to be slightly more specific about when it happened. Last week, there was a change to our policy about when to report into the office, and I never got it. And then you follow up with the impact and the behavior, and then the impact of that. When you came into work yesterday, you were 10 minutes late. The other staff members had to push the meeting back 10 minutes until you were here. Right. So yesterday, the situation was yesterday. The behavior was you were 10 minutes late, and the impact was everybody was inconvenienced. The meeting was pushed back 10 minutes. So yeah, so I think people are getting the idea. It's very specific. It's the behavior. You're not saying you're always late to the meeting, and that really makes us mad. It's just trying to be much more specific.
Somebody made a comment that they responded too directly, and they were just trying to be accurate. And so that's another whole topic. But how you engage with people, you want to be careful. People like Pat want you to be direct, and people like Ann want you to be a little bit more conversational, more detailed. So you want to kind of read the person you're negotiating with and try to mirror their communication style as best you can.
Right. If usually we would do this webinar in a half to a full day, and then we'd really get into a lot more of that. And, some nuances even on giving this the feedback strategies in, is depending, using a yes and, or, using personal feelings instead of direct impacts. But it all kind of gets at the same thing. So I appreciate everybody who shared. And now that we're already at 2, I'm going to kind of move us on a little bit to the next slide. So we've delivered our message, and you've listened, you've done your active listening, right? Because we deliver our message, but the most important part of that to kind of diffuse negative feelings is to make sure you do that listening. So hopefully now you can move on to problem solving. And again, I'm going to remind you again, the goal is not to win the argument. It's or to prove that you're right. Is really just to find a resolution that works for both people. So you don't want to find yourself discussing whose fault it was. You want to get to a place where the other person can at least agree that the behavior occurred. And so that's why you want to be specific, right? Because you want that person to agree that the behavior occurred. And only then, at that point, can you move past the why, so you get beyond the excuses of why it might have happened, but really coming up with a resolution that works for both people. To solve the problem. And that's the problem solving part of the conversation. And for that, you use the same strategies for problem solving that Alan covered in the final step of the 4-step process. So you start the process differently because you're bringing the feedback to somebody else, but at the end you end up in that same negotiating phase and use all the strategies that Alan talked to you about for that negotiating stage. So now I'm going to turn it back over to Alan to sum it up.
Okay. Thanks, Jenny. Yeah, so we're getting near the end here. We will have time for questions, so people that want to stay on for that. But here's a kind of a quick checklist that sums up some of the key points we've talked about and adds a couple more. How do you get ready to successfully negotiate what you anticipate will be a conflict? So you want to be clear about your own interests. You want to think about the situation and what's important to you and why is it important to you, and try to rank them. And only focus on the ones that are most important. You can't get everything, but you can get something, and you want to make sure you get the ones that are most critical to you. And it's important to learn about the other person's interests and their priority ranking. So you may already know some of that about them, or you may have some questions you can prepare so you can fully understand what kind of results they're looking for. And then in the session, you want to kind of brainstorm without judgment to begin the problem solving process. So once you've cleared the air and clarified both positions and interests, then you want to talk about how can we get this done, and brainstorming, come up with a number of options. Again, before you even get in there, you can begin to think about some things that might work. You may learn new things and have to, leave some of them behind, but you want to come in with some possible ideas that might work for them as well as for you. And then you want to encourage you and your partner, let's just get a bunch of ideas out before we start to criticize them, before we start to analyze them. Let's get a lot on paper, because it's kind of a creative problem solving process. You sometimes come up with a real out of the box idea that you wouldn't have if you critically looked at each item first. And then if it's a really big issue that's got a lot of parts to it, you may want to break it down and say, let's just take this first part. Let's talk about how we can make this part work. And then another part, and then we'll kind of put them all together. So if it's really big, it's hard to solve all at once, and breaking it down into small pieces can make it much more manageable and possible. And then you want to draft some kind of as you listen, you want to draft some kind of proposal or resolution that you think will achieve both of your interests. So here's what I think we might be able to do, and here's how I think it meets what you're trying to accomplish. And what do you think? So that you want to get to something concrete, and it's hard after a long negotiation to come up with that, you may want to table it and say, let's both think about it and come back with some ideas. So if it's been a difficult or long conversation, you may not resolve it right in the first place. So you want to try to anticipate, if you know the other person, you know this is coming up, you want to anticipate what their reaction will be and how can you adapt. Again, that comment someone made, they were very direct and didn't go over so well. So how can you be a little bit more circumspect and still get your point across? Or if you're dealing with Pat and that's not your style, how can you kind of ramp it up and be very direct, because that's what he wants. He wants you to come right back at him. And then it's also important that you try to calm yourself. As we said earlier, you're trying to diffuse their tension. You got to worry about your tension. We got a couple more tips in just a moment on that. And then you want to choose a good, as Jenny mentioned, a good time and place, a place that's private without distraction. Choose a time when you both have some time to talk, not when you're running up against the meeting or the end of the day. And this is all, a lot of this is preparation. So as you're thinking through the conflict, write a little script for yourself and role play it with somebody, practice it, and see how it feels saying it, see how they feel hearing it, and and work it through. This is often this is a very important and difficult conversation, and it's worth the investment of some time up front to be as successful as you can. So we've covered a number of points today about how to resolve conflict, and I just want to point out that many of them also serve as ways to prevent conflict in the first place. So disagreements that are handled poorly become conflicts, but disagreements that are handled well can lead to helpful solutions and changes. So we want to be able to use listening more often, and that's really the key element. We do that all the time, we're going to end up with a better relationship, and there won't be a need for a conflict. All right, and then finally, in a conflict situation, common reactions are either to fight, to flee, or to freeze. We might become aggressive and push back hard, or we surrender and walk away. We just kind of freeze in place and we just don't engage. And none of them help resolve the conflict in a positive way. But those are all natural reactions, and we all do them without even thinking about it. We're there, we're fighting, we're fleeing, or we're freezing. And so we have to take some steps to walk away from that reaction and try to be more positive and engage in a constructive way. So here are some points to think about: how to manage yourself and your partner to stay positively engaged. One is to become curious. So if someone says something, you're really against it, and you kind of feel yourself either fighting, fleeing, is to say, wait a minute, why would he or she say that? What could they be thinking? Let me take some time to learn more about it. And so be curious. Be curious. Don't judge. Just be curious and wonder. And engage your logical mind instead of your reactive fighting mind. But how can I learn more about this? What can I learn from this? And so ask questions to yourself if it's not appropriate to say out loud yet, but begin to get if you ask yourself a question, you begin to think in a calmer way. And so that's a great technique. You want to be listening for their interest. Why would they say that? Again, we wouldn't use the why out loud to myself. What are they trying to accomplish? What's their goal? Is there another way I can meet that? And then when they're done with their first outburst, whatever that may be, it's switched to open-ended questions so you can actually explore that and find out more and show that you're interested and curious and not judging and not critical. So be clear about how they see it, and their expectations, their interests, where they want to end up, and make sure you paraphrase what you heard, so that they feel good with their words coming back to them, and again, that builds that relationship, calms the emotions on both sides. Think about what's negotiable from what they're saying. What can you live with? And note that, accept that. Say, yeah, that's a good idea. I could do that part, or I can live with that. And then what's not negotiable, what's not acceptable, and say, nah, this is a line. I can't cross that line. These ideas won't work for me, but I like that part. Can we build on that? Can we play with that a little bit and get where we're going? So that's your common ground, finding something you can agree on. And finally, when they've calmed down and you fully understand them, then you share your point of view as a point of information. Some ways to kind of introduce that. Can I have a few minutes to share with you how I see it? I see it differently. Maybe there's a way we can bridge this gap, right? So you're not saying, I disagree. I have my point, you have your point, but I do see it differently, but let's look for a bridge, right? So we're kind of promoting it in a positive way. We're not saying that I have the answer, I'm the answer, but I have a different approach, and let's see how we can make that work. So this brings us to the end of our program. We hope we've given you the tools for effectively managing and preventing workplace conflicts. I'm sure you have some questions. We'll look back through the chat box, and please chat in anything additional. We'll be happy to stay on. Before we do, I want to turn it over to Blake to close out our program.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you, Jenny. This was tremendous. It looks like we already have a couple of really good questions that we'll cover too in just a second. Thank you for joining us today. If you're momentarily, you'll receive a link to the evaluation, and actually when you exit as well, you'll be redirected. Please, 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 please give us your feedback. It's important to us. Look at that timely transition. There's your link for you right there. You can use the QR code as well. Special thank you to Jenny and Alan for the tremendous content as usual. We appreciate it. I was actually trying to dig up which of that training we did in the past that was related to supervisors, and I'm wondering if it was one of the coping ones. So bear with us. Takes us a day or two. This meeting was recorded. We'll get it uploaded on our training, OVS training, VAP Training Center webpage, as well as the YouTube channel. And in the YouTube channel notes, there'll be additional links to the PowerPoint, additional links to, if we can dig up some of these other trainings that were referenced, we'll put those in there as well. So again, thank you, Jenny and Alan, for everything, and let's see if we can tackle some of these questions.
Okay, thanks, Blake. And go back one slide, Nicole. So there's our email up there if you need to leave and want to email us. We're happy to answer questions by email. But the question came up real early is, how is it different with group dynamics? It's one thing, a one-on-one conversation. That's hard enough, but what do you do with a group of people? And again, that's a topic for another session, but real briefly is to so in that case, I would set some more ground rules right up front. That well, the conversation is getting a little heated. Let's stop for a minute and say, you know, we're going to give everybody a chance to talk. I want everybody to think about what you've heard. Please don't repeat what somebody else said, but if you have something new and different. And another technique I like to use if it's heated between a couple people is that before you speak, you have to summarize what the person before you said. A quick paraphrase, and that forces people to listen. If they can't do it, they can't speak. So I wasn't really here listening. Well, then you can't say anything. You have to be quiet and say listen some more. So it does tend to force people to be a little bit more collaborative. And to think of yourself as the facilitator and try not to have a stake in the conversation. If there's somebody presenting your point of view, and try to move into a neutral role where you just make sure everybody is heard, everybody has a chance to speak, and what you're doing is listening for the common ground, and you're listening for, oh, I see some interests that align. I think both parties, or the three different views we have going here, have something in common, and I think we can find a way, so that if you can do that, and as worst comes to worst, is divide it up, and if you're the supervisor, let's take this one by one. Why don't you each come in my office and we'll talk it through, and then we'll come back together. We have, if it's really being dysfunctional. But there's a lot to group dynamics. But I don't know, Jenny, you have anything else you want to add real quick?
No, I think there are a lot of group dynamics, and we can talk about it. But I think some of the things that you've given are good opportunities. But again, it's positions and interests. You want to make sure everybody has an opportunity to present, at least have some opportunity to speak, but calmly, and also to be heard. So actually, I like that strategy, Alan. I've not actually used that before, but the making everybody paraphrase. So that's a good one. We had another question that is about offices being closed and not being able to have those conversations in person. And so the question was that because the office is closed for COVID, a lot of the communication is through email and chatting, and sometimes conflicts arise because the tone of an email is misinterpreted. And so how do you address that if you can't have an opportunity to speak with a coworker about it? And so what I would say is I would maybe send an email that says, I think you may have yesterday when I sent the email about X, I think you may have misinterpreted what I meant by that. Do you have an opportunity to talk about it? So I think, one of the things that it is very hard to resolve a conflict, to know that you've been heard if you aren't actually seeing somebody read the email, that you're not having the conversation. So even if you can't be in person, and even if you can't do a Zoom call, if it's at all possible, at least to have a conversation about it, so that you can, clarify what you meant by the email. So you can hear what the other person, what their interpretation was. You can have that giving the feedback, getting that and doing the active listening. So the degree to which it can be a conversation and not an email exchange, because I think as you so accurately portrayed, you can't convey tone. No matter how many emojis you use, you cannot convey tone in a text or in an email. You don't know that I am if you send me a really long email about why, what happened in your interpretation of it, you don't actually know that I'm reading it all. You may have a better sense though that I'm listening to you if I'm looking at you. And if it has to be by email, I use some of those active listening techniques and responding to the email. So somebody sends you an email that indicates that they misinterpreted something that you said. Use the active listening, paraphrase what they said back to them. Use some of those things that show that you heard what they're saying, and then try and respond that way. Alan, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I'd go a step further. If it's a difficult conflict, I would refuse to do it by email.
Right.
People who study communication say that the validity of the message is judged 50% by body language and 40% by tone of voice, and less than 10% of the words themselves. And email, all you have are the words. We got emojis and other ways to, try to bring some of that in. But if it's a difficult conflict, I would just say, can we please have a phone call? At least on a phone call, you get 50%. And on a Zoom or, a Meets or something like that, you get the body language, you get almost 100% of the quality. As Jenny said, it's not just how I'm expressing myself, but I can watch your reaction in real time and see that when I'm saying that I think is helpful, you're getting furious about. Anne turned red at the end of that. Oh, it wasn't a video. Sorry. There's a video clip of that where Anne actually turns red. And that says a lot, and words just don't do it. So, yeah. There was another question about how do you do this with a supervisor, supervisee? This was earlier on, and again, a power issue. As a supervisor, what Jenny said is that, using that situation behavior impact is a great neutral way to kind of give feedback and set an expectation, and the active listening to build the bridge. But if you're the supervisee and you're feeling put upon by your supervisor, treated unfairly, again, there was another comment about somebody feeling that the group that she was doing some work for wasn't listening to her, didn't accept her approach. How do you push back in a helpful way? Again, situation behavior impact can work up the chain as well as down. That when you don't give me a chance to share my point of view, or when you don't kind of show me that you've really heard me, it makes me feel less inclined to work on this problem, and it's hard for me to be a contributing member when I don't feel that I'm my views are valued or taken into consideration. So that's a situation behavior impact for for a supervisee. It's a little more risky, more uncomfortable, but it's assertive communication. It really does work both ways.
There was a question about how to deal with individual subordinates who refuse to come to you to discuss and share their issues, and instead immediately go higher up to HR with formal complaints. You're never given the opportunity to try and resolve. So that's a slightly bigger issue. So, there are two ways that I would respond to it. One, and then I'll let Alan respond to it. Well, one is to have that, first of all, have that conversation with the employee. You can even use the situation behavior impact there when you go, yesterday when you went straight to HR without discussing this issue with me, didn't give us an opportunity to really explore all the issues and try and resolve it here. And the impact of that was that it blew away out of proportion, or whatever the impact of it is that way. The bigger question that kind of takes it beyond this is you, to some degree, is getting cooperation both from your supervisor and HR to send that person back to resolve it, to ask that question first. So before they take a complaint, if it's not a egregious complaint, but it's just an issue, before they have that conversation about you with them, to send that employee back to you to convert to do that with you. So it takes it's a different it's a different scenario than we're talking about here, but it's the same thing as, and and you saying to your supervisor, listen, when you met with that person yesterday to talk about the issue, it gave her permission to continually circumvent me. And so it made me feel, it made me, it's giving you, taking away all of my authority or whatever. So, if I, request that they send that person back down. HR complaints are slightly different because those usually rise to a different level. But if they don't rise to that level, again, having that same conversation with HR.
Yeah. HR and your supervisor may want to be helpful and step in, and they're being harmful. So to point that out and help them see that. The other thing I would do, and this may be hard for those of you to hear, but is to look in the mirror. And I think you may be seeing part of the problem. Why are the employees not going to you? There's some problem there. Now, it could be historical. It could be not your doing. It could be that they don't have a good feeling about authority figures in general. But to me, it highlights that I need to build some bridges with these people. I need to find a way to connect with them better. I'm missing something in how we're relating. I'm not being supportive in the way they want me to be supportive. I'm not giving them helpful feedback. The feedback I give is critical and not constructive. So there's something there. To me, it's a signal that I have to work on this relationship. And there's some people who are just really not cut out for our organization, for this work, and maybe these are people who are not able to collaborate and work in a community way and aren't a good fit here. So all those things need to be looked at. I think Jenny's are the tactical immediate response, but the strategic one is to really look at yourself first and what am I doing or not doing that could have helped bridge that. I had a couple of comments by someone who works on Native cultural issues and has felt, again, not heard, not listened to. In this case, the comment is they were critical of the work. They listened, but did not listen in a manner that was helpful. It was listening to appease, but no real feedback. So I think it's a great comment that just because you think you're listening to this difficult employee that's going around your back, they may not perceive you as listening, right? So in this case, if you're pretty sure that they're really not listening and they're really just kind of yesing you and ignoring you, again, situation behavior impact is, I've shared this work, which, I feel very proud of. I think it's very well done. I hear your criticism that you don't agree. You don't think it's what's needed. I'm not sure that you heard my response because I think I answered your questions and I think it works. It would help me. This is one of my favorite techniques. It would help me out a lot if you could kind of repeat what I said so I know how I came across, because maybe I'm not coming across well. Right. So asking somebody to repeat back because I don't think you're listening is very very attacking, especially if it's your supervisor. But I want to know if I came across well. And if they weren't listening, they'll be really caught short. I'm not sure. Why don't you say it again? Let's, I'll give you a chance to speak with someone who's really listening. So I think it's a pretty powerful and mostly respectful technique. So.
All right, we have probably, just think if there's anything else on the list here. I think we've got everything. I appreciate all 132 of you who have stuck around till almost 2:30. If you have any final questions, we can answer them now. Otherwise, as Blake said, the recording of this will be posted in a few days. We would like to remind everybody to fill out the evaluation because one of the questions, in addition to kind of what happened today, is what are some other topics that you'd like to hear? And although, we have just a couple months left in at least this contract year, we may have opportunity to get to something.
So here's a question of employee that you supervise avoid you and responds in an aggressive manner when they do talk to you. I call this the meta conversation. We can have a conversation about how we converse. And so to say to the employee, when I come to you with, like yesterday when I came to you about this thing, you didn't make eye contact, you didn't look up, you mumbled something, but I really didn't feel like we had much of a conversation. I'm not sure that I was even heard. It would help me if you could, repeat back what I say so I know how I came across, or if you could ask me some questions or tell me what you think in a calm way. That's the avoiding. And then if they're aggressive, the same kind of thing. When we have a conversation, you have to kind of describe aggressive in behavioral terms. You raise your voice, you lean in, you get right 3 inches from my face. I feel that that's very aggressive, and it kind of shuts me down and makes it hard for me to have a good conversation with you. So is there a way we can have our conversation in a more neutral manner? Or another way, is there something I'm doing that makes you feel uncomfortable, that you feel you need to be aggressive to? Am I not listening? Am I not being respectful? Is there, as a leader, one of the strategies or traits that I value in a good leader is being vulnerable, being confident, strong, competent, knowledgeable, and vulnerable. So in this case, am I doing something? I'd ask him, is there something I'm doing that's causing you to be uncomfortable? And it could well be unintentionally that, again, our style mismatch is causing them to be uncomfortable. So Jenny?
It also could be, but and I think I would also say that if it's a supervisee relationship, you do need to clarify what your expectations are for it. So, or it is an important part of this position that you and I meet on a biweekly basis so we can cover these topics. I'm having a hard time getting you to schedule those meetings, but it's important that it happens. So let me, I think you can, follow up on what Alan said with, let me know what are the, some of the reasons why we're having a hard time scheduling these. Is it something about the conversations itself? Is it something about your scheduling? But it's important that it happens. And so, and then that problem solving, how can we get to a place so that we are meeting regularly? At some point as a supervisor, if they're just avoiding you, you want to get down to the bottom. Are they avoiding you because they don't like meeting, because they are trying to, because they don't want to be questioned about work that they're doing, or is there something else going on? And so you want to get to the bottom of that.
Okay, so we're coming up on our 2:30 mark. So thank you all for being with us. Again, you have our email. Feel free to send us additional questions. We're happy to respond. And on the evaluation, if there's any other trainings you want, if we have any more resources left, we'd be happy to do another one of these.
Thank you, everyone.
Perfect timing. Thanks, everyone. Yeah, Jenny, Alan, appreciate it. You guys have a wonderful day. Nicole, thank you to you too.